master plan. Just quick run through the agenda today. We'll do introductions for the whole group so we get to know each other a little bit. We'll talk about the responsibilities of the advisory group, some of the opportunities that the group has to interact with the project team, what the plan is, what we're working on now for the plan, what we see coming up in the future for the master plan. We'll have a big discussion about what the goals and objectives for the plan should be to really set sort of the aspirations for the plan. We'll have an open-ended discussion about ideas that the project team should look at into the future for pedestrian concerns and other issues that you might have. We'll open up the floor to public comment from people not on the advisory group, and then we'll talk about next steps. So first, we'll do some introductions. My name's Eli. I've been at the Park and Planning Commission for about 1.5 years. And before that, I worked in Silver Spring, also actually at a firm called Tool Design Group, which is a national active transportation planning, engineering, and landscape architecture firm. And I did a lot of safe routes to school plans. I did pedestrian master plans, bicycle master plans, transit access planning for jurisdictions large and small across the country. So I've been with the commission for about 1.5 years. And I'm really excited to work with all of you in sort of the months and years ahead, maybe, on making this plan sort of everything that we aspire for it to be. With that, sort of the responsibilities of this group. One, I think, check, passionate about pedestrian issues. All of you, in different ways, have expressed your passion for these issues. Excited about making the county a better place. One of the things that will make this group really successful is if we can have a thoughtful and respectful discussion with each other. It's okay for us to disagree. It's okay for us to have different opinions, but we need to be respectful of each other and of the process that we're working through. And then another thing that I think would be really great of this group is if we all have sort of community networks that are in our sort of residential neighborhoods or different organizations that we're affiliated with, it would be really helpful to get more information out to those people that may not be aware of this plan, and then also to bring back information to this group and to the project team about concerns or issues that people in your communities and your social circles are experiencing, just so we can have as much information as possible. And then, do you want to talk about sort of the relationship between?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we are super excited to have you all here. We're very excited to get this pedestrian plan going, and we're very appreciative of the time commitment that you're giving us and that you're giving the county. We know some of you are coming from very far distances, and it's not always easy to get here, so thank you for that. I guess the things that we hope to get from you all, we're going to be putting a lot of materials out in front of you. So we want your thoughts, we want your comments, we want your questions, and we want your ideas. Hopefully, we have a lot of ideas of our own, of course, but we can certainly benefit from the ideas that you have. I think our responsibilities are going to be to thoughtfully review everything that you bring to us, to give you timely, thoughtful responses. We want to make sure to follow up on everything that you bring to this committee. But ultimately, I think Eli and the group, we're going to have to filter through all the information that you give us, decide what goes into the master plan, what doesn't make it into the master plan, what might be future efforts. But we're super excited to have you all here.
Great. Thanks, Dave. And then just briefly, I'm going to go through sort of what the plan is, what we envision the plan to be. If you've been to one of the kickoff meetings for this plan, you've seen parts of this presentation already. Forgive me. But this is the county's first pedestrian master plan. You may find that hard to believe, you may not find that hard to believe, depending on your perspective. The goal of this plan, sort of the overarching vision, is to make it more comfortable, make it safer, make it more convenient, and make it more accessible for people to walk and roll around this county. So people of all ages and abilities in all parts of the county. We really think that a big part of this plan is going to be making the county accessible for people who may have mobility challenges, may have visual disabilities, other things like that. So when we talk about, when we talk about being a pedestrian or walking, we mean that to be inclusive of people that may be using a wheelchair or other mobility devices, things like that. So I like to think about this plan and like to think about what we can hope to aspire to for Montgomery County is, there's a quote from Anne Hidalgo, who's the mayor of Paris right now, where she says she wants Paris to be a place where parents can feel free for their kids to walk without having to hold their hands. And we're not there in Montgomery County, but that's something that I'd like us to get to be at. And then another thing, Debbie talked a little bit in her introduction about how there was a grocery store within walking distance of her and it's closed now. I think another part of this plan is we want people to be able to make trips that are within a short distance pedestrian trips. So what that means is there may be a grocery store, there may be parks, there may be other things that are within a distance that you feel comfortable walking, but maybe the roads are too fast, maybe there isn't a sidewalk, maybe there isn't lighting, those sorts of things. We want to make it so instead of driving or maybe not taking that trip at all, people are walking and they're walking with their families and they're walking comfortably and safely. This is not just a plan for sidewalks. It's not just a plan for crosswalks. We really understand that the pedestrian experience is multifaceted. So it's about having enough time to cross the street safely. It's about parking lots that are designed with pedestrians in mind. It's about lighting in the summer. It's about shade in the winter. If it ever snows again, it will be about snow removal. It's about pedestrian detour through construction zones. It's about smooth and flat surfaces to walk and to roll on. This plan is an opportunity for us to look at all of those things and more, to take the serious and necessary steps we need to take to improve pedestrian safety, to improve comfort, and to improve access all across Montgomery County. So that's sort of our charge here. We are just one organization out of many that need to make that happen. On the screen, you can see different logos from different organizations. Montgomery Planning is where we work. We act in this process as sort of the visioning agency. We set, with this master plan, we're creating a vision for how the pedestrian environment, the pedestrian experience in Montgomery County should be for the next 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And that's a really important role. What we don't do as the planning department is implement this master plan. So by that I mean we will not be building sidewalks. We will not be installing traffic signals. That would be our partners at the State Highway Administration or Montgomery County DOT, Department of Transportation, or in some cases the Parks Department. But we're going to be working with them to make sure this plan is as successful as it can be. Other organizations that we're going to be working with in county government include permitting services. Those are the people who, if you want to develop property, you have to get permits from us, from the planning department, but also from them, and they're responsible for both enforcing, making sure you're building what you've said you're going to build, and when there's construction, making sure that the pedestrian accommodations you provided are in keeping with what you've agreed to and in keeping with the law. The Montgomery County Police Department, obviously, enforcement of traffic safety issues is sort of right in their wheelhouse, so I'll be working with them on that as part of this plan. I think it's really important for us that this plan not sit on a shelf, we don't want to create a plan that has really great recommendations but no follow through. So one of the ways that we're going to be working to make sure that doesn't happen is it is our goal through this process to meet regularly with these different organizations to create buy-in for the recommendations that we all are going to bring to the table, such that when this plan is adopted by council, maybe some of the recommendations have already been implemented by the agencies responsible. So we're going to hopefully hit the ground running when it comes to implementing the plan. And then what I would also like to do is, if things aren't totally sealed up by the time the plan's been adopted, with the project team, it's our goal to sort of put together draft legislation or draft executive regulations or whatever needs to happen to make it as easy as possible to implement some of the things that we want to do. This plan is closely tied to the county's 2016 Vision Zero resolution. So for those who don't know what Vision Zero is, basically it's a commitment by the county to reduce serious injuries and fatalities on our roads to zero by 2030. This is a really ambitious goal, and it really requires a change in mindset from an approach to our roads where the most important thing is to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible, to an approach that says you want to get between those places as safely as possible. So it's really a change in that regard. One of the action items as part of the 2-year action plan for Vision Zero was to do this pedestrian master plan. We also see the pedestrian master plan as really integral to the way Montgomery County can sort of approach climate issues by making it easier and safer and more comfortable to walk. It's our goal to increase the amount of walking that happens, reduce the amount of driving, and improve the environment in that way. But I mean, aside from all of that, aside from those plans, I think this is a plan whose time has come. Even if we didn't have any of those plans, this is a county where over the past 60 years we've built narrow sidewalks next to high-speed roads. We've built roads without sidewalks. We've built sidewalks. We've built intersections where you can't cross the street safely. We have places even that we may consider generally walkable, like Bethesda, where there are myriad reasons why you can't cross the street or the sidewalks themselves are uncomfortable. This is just a tweet that I found last week, maybe 2 weeks ago now. It's from Pete Pieringer, who's the public information officer from the fire and police departments, that you can be hit by a car in Montgomery County while walking on a sidewalk by the side mirror of a passing vehicle. So that's wild, and that should not happen. So that's just sort of encapsulates the challenge that we have here.
That's Viersville Road for you.
Yeah, that's Viersville Road. So, but it's also, the state roads are very similar in that way. So that's sort of, we have a pedestrian environment that creates situations like that, but at the same time, there are a ton of people walking in Montgomery County for different reasons. So the picture on the screen is a walk I did with Annie, actually, in the Silver Spring area. We sort of walked the Purple Line route when it's probably colder than it is now, actually, a few months ago. But we have a lot of people walking here. In certain parts of the county, based on census data, we know that almost 60% of people are walking as part of a commute trip. So whether that's walking to or from work, walking to the bus to go to work, walking to the metro to go to work. And then, as you've all said in your introductions, people are walking for many other reasons besides work trips, to get groceries, for exercise, to walk the dog, that sort of thing. So this plan, the goal of this plan, really, what we see it as, is to make these existing pedestrian trips safer and more comfortable, but also to encourage more people to feel comfortable to walk on a daily basis. Things that we're doing now and things that we have been doing, you were all emailed the best practices report from that we had Tool Design do to sort of look at what are the ways that this plan could be as successful as possible, what are some of the strategies, what are some of the outreach approaches, what are some of the, just like the way the physical document is laid out. So we commissioned that actually before the plan was officially kicked off. So we did that sort of over the spring and summer of 2019. And that, if you're in this room or you're listening on the live stream right now, that's also available on our website. You can go to montgomeryplanning.org/walking here, and you can download those materials and all of the materials that we're talking about tonight. So if you have any questions about that report, we can talk about that later or sort of offline. We also have done sort of a very data-driven pedestrian level of comfort analysis. We will be doing and are currently working on this predictive safety analysis, and then I'm also going to talk briefly about the student travel tally that we're doing. So the first thing is a pedestrian level of comfort analysis. It's really important for us that we had a way to quantify the pedestrian experience for a number of reasons. One, we had done something similar for the bicycle master plan, so it was really important to us that if we were looking at something through a bicycle lens, we also were able to look at something through a pedestrian lens. What this analysis does is it breaks down the pedestrian environment, segments, so like sidewalks, streets, crosswalks. It breaks that down into 4 scoring levels. So from very comfortable, being dark blue on the map on the previous slide, through somewhat comfortable, uncomfortable, and unacceptable. And it does that by looking at these different variables that we're collecting. So we're looking at how wide these pathways are, how separated they are from traffic, how many lanes at an intersection you have to cross, how fast the traffic speed is, what types of crosswalk markings there are. So is it just 2 parallel lines? Do you have a thicker continental crosswalk? Or maybe it's completely unmarked. And then if it's a wide street, is there a median island? Is there a place for you to rest while you're crossing the street? So on the screen, generally, if a characteristic was narrower, so if a sidewalk was narrower or a buffer from traffic was narrower or traffic speed was faster, where there were more lanes to cross, that would be worse than wider sidewalks, fewer lanes to cross, slower speeds, that sort of thing. So going back to the map, you can see that if you go to mcatlas.org, there's this interactive map. Eventually, our goal is to have the whole county coded out with this analysis. And right now, if you go to that website, you can see the progress that we've made. And we're really excited about this approach because it allows us to do some pretty cool analysis. This is a map of existing access to parks in the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills sector plan area. And on the map, sort of Georgia Avenue is the central spine, and then the Beltway at 495 intersects across the middle, and the areas in this dark blue color are the areas that, using that, just the comfortable walking network that we've identified, these are the areas that have access to parks. So the areas sort of along Georgia and Grace Church Road and Highland Drive in the dark gray are areas that you can probably get to a park technically, but it's not along a comfortable route. Maybe the sidewalk's too narrow, maybe there is no sidewalk and this traffic is too quick. But what we were able to do is we were able to quantify the number of people within that area that didn't have comfortable park access, and then we were able, on this next map, to draw some of these dark blue lines to estimate if we made certain improvements, how many of those people would gain access, comfortable access to parks. So you can see the areas in light blue, which are mostly along Georgia Avenue, the Americana Finmark property, the sort of big property north of the Beltway, gets comfortable park access through this scenario. And what this enabled us to do is really make the case for pedestrian infrastructure improvements, to make the case for adding a new safe crossing of Georgia Avenue, to make the case for specific sidewalks, because you can, when we're thinking about a cost-benefit analysis for different projects with DOT, when it comes to the capital improvement program, you can say, if you build this sidewalk, 400 people can now safely and comfortably access this park, that sort of thing. We've also, it's not really just parks. We've done similar analysis recently to Purple Line stations, so looking at Littonsville and Manchester Place and Silver Spring, Bethesda and Chevy Chase Lake and all of these stations where people are going to, for this line to be successful, people are going to have to walk to these stations, and the contractor's building a certain amount of pedestrian infrastructure, but there are going to be gaps, and there are going to be places where people aren't going to feel comfortable. So what we were able to do is look at where those weak points are using this analysis, and actually make additional recommendations to improve sidewalks, improve crossings beyond what the Purple Line partners are actually building. And we presented that analysis as part of the Planning Board's Capital Improvement Program review. And this is something that we're doing a larger report for the Purple Line Transit, the Purple Line Corridor Coalition as well, that we can send out to this group as well. Really just, I think at the end of the day, for us, the data is really important because, one, it allows us to prioritize in a way that is sort of need-based, and then it also allows us to make the case maybe more articulately and strongly for why these things are important, beyond just, it would be nice to have a sidewalk on my street, to be able to quantify the actual benefits of that in terms of transit ridership or park access, or access to grocery stores or other things like that, we think is really helpful. So that's just sort of one part of what we are working on. We continue to add to this map on a daily basis. It's a labor of love, and it's a lot of labor.
And a lot of love.
And a lot of love too. So the next big thing that we're doing that we're also really excited about is called a predictive safety analysis. This is really a key part of a real approach to Vision Zero. Vision Zero is really, the goal of Vision Zero is to be proactive to safety issues rather than reactive. So instead of fixing an intersection or a street after there's been a serious injury, it's to say, this location is more likely to have a serious injury, so let's fix it before that happens. So this analysis uses locations of existing crashes and sort of the contextual data about our streets, so like how many lanes there are, what the surrounding land uses are, what types of intersections and signals there are, to create sort of a correlation and a relationship between those conditions and street safety. So what this allows us to do is identify those dangerous locations before crashes occur. And then rather than being reactive to individual locations, we can fix 10 locations at once with similar treatments that will eliminate crashes from happening. So the goal is to be really proactive, and Jesse is actually sort of leading that analysis. It's a huge effort from like a data cleaning and analysis perspective to a sort of statistical analysis perspective, and we're really excited about it. The county council is really excited about it, and the planning board is really excited about it. Another thing that we're doing that actually has never been done for all of Montgomery County before is trying to get a sense of how many students are walking to and from school, and which schools they're walking to and from. This is really important to us because we think it's good that students are walking to school. We want more students to walk to school. We want students to be able to walk to school safely. And one of the ways that we can do that is to provide MCPS and provide our project team with sort of the baseline data and understanding of which school, for each school, how many students are walking, how many students are getting dropped off at school, how many students are taking the bus, that sort of thing. So what we've done is we've worked with MCPS to essentially put a survey on, like an anonymous survey on computers, and when students log in, they're prompted to take this survey about their personal transportation habits. And to date, we've received about 74,000 responses.
Is it at every level? Like how? And it's to the students themselves?
Yeah. So the initial idea, this student travel tally idea is, we didn't invent it. It sort of comes from the National Center for Safe Routes to School. And the way it gets done in a lot of other communities is you'll have a homeroom teacher, or just any one teacher will just ask students to raise their hands. How did you get to school today? Did you walk? Show of hands. Did you bike? Show of hands, that sort of thing. MCPS had, I think, a really cool idea to sort of take advantage of the fact that students are using their computers on a daily basis to just prompt students individually for this information. So we've gotten back a pretty awesome number of responses. It seems really great. We're still
But
sort
like
of...
this like popped up on my 5th grader's Chromebook.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, it did, and they answered it,
Okay.
hopefully. So that's we're still sort of waiting on additional data from some schools. Like there were some schools had 95% participation. Some schools had 0% participation. Like for instance, Montgomery Blair had somehow no one has responded, which seems unlikely that all the students chose not to respond. So we're still looking at some of that. Our goal for this really is to understand where, for instance, maybe there's a school that there are a lot of students walking to school. The survey says there are a lot of students walking to school, but if we go back and we look at the level of comfort analysis for that school area, it's actually really uncomfortable to walk. So we have a lot of students walking, but in really uncomfortable conditions. So to us, that would say we should prioritize improving the pedestrian environment in that community. But on the other side, there are going to be places in the data where no one's walking to school, but it's actually the conditions are really great. And what that suggests to us is maybe there needs to be some sort of programming at the school to encourage people to walk, maybe some like parental chaperones through the PTA or something to encourage walking in that way, because the environment is already there, the infrastructure is already there. It's just creating sort of the trust, the social trust in to allow students to take advantage of that. And then one of the other goals is to really help MCPS advocate for making improvements sort of off campus, to understand the relationship between students walking and students getting bused. Maybe there are some investments that MCPS could make off campus to improve pedestrian connections that would reduce the need for bus trips, because we've improved safety, so we've reduced the need for buses. So working with MCPS to talk about that.
I was just wondering if you could share the questions that you put out there.
Yeah, definitely. We can send out the survey to this group. No crazy questions, but yeah, it's cool. And then sort of what's on the horizon for us. We are currently working on sort of submitting through procurement 2 requests for proposals to get some outside assistance. The first is to do a countywide survey. What we'd like to accomplish, I had mentioned that we have census data about walking. The problem with that data is it's really only about the commute trip, the trip to work, and I think we all know in this room that walking happens way more often for reasons that aren't related to work. So what this survey is going to do is for the county as a whole, and then for different smaller geographies of the county, it's going to get us, we're going to find out how often people are walking, how far people are walking, what reasons people are walking for, sort of the biggest stumbling blocks that they face when it comes to walking, and then probably some other questions. And then what that will do is give us a better sense countywide and then in different geographies how much walking is actually happening. And then our goal really is to look at when this plan is adopted, maybe 2 years down the line, 4 years down the line, to do the survey again and track our progress in achieving some of our goals. So are more people walking? Do people feel generally that the pedestrian environment is safer than it was when we started this process, that sort of thing? And it'll just be sort of, we have a lot of other performance measures for different plans, and this will be another performance measure that we have in our toolbox. The other thing we're looking to get assistance for is as we develop policy and design recommendations, to get an understanding of what other communities are doing. So what are the best practices in pedestrian lighting? What are the best practices in creating an urban tree canopy? What are the best practices in creating accessible pathways and entranceways and things like that? When we are having our conversations with the Department of Transportation or the State Highway Administration or other agencies, knowing this information really helps us understand sort of the realm, like what's realistic to expect, and provide us the tools we need to make the case for what we want to make the pedestrian environment better. So that's another thing that we're working on. And then interagency coordination, as I mentioned, is something that we're always working on, but we're going to be doing that. And then we're doing this other exciting project now that you all will learn about. We're going to have a briefing as part of this series of advisory group meetings about it, but Dave's going to talk about, it's called the Complete Streets Design Guide.
Yeah, so who knows what complete streets are? By show of hands? A little bit?
A few hands.
So complete streets generally is the idea that our roadway network should be providing opportunities for people to get to the places that they need to go, whether they're driving, taking the bus, walking, or bicycling. So this is a project that's being jointly managed, co-led by the Planning Department and by the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. And we're putting together a whole set of guidance on how to make our streets more complete. And so what will happen is each street will have a roadway classification that will speak to how people use the road and sort of the land use context, whether it's a downtown area, whether it's more like a town center like Olney, whether it's a rural area, suburban area, transit corridor, an industrial area. And it'll have different guidance on what the components of the roadway network should look and feel like. So, for example, it might speak to how wide lanes should be, or what should be the speed that we're targeting for different roads. How wide should the sidewalks be? How frequently should we have safe crossings? And these types of things. So I think we're planning to bring this to you in a couple of months. In addition, there's going to be a some public engagement around this effort in the coming months as well, outside of this group.
I have a quick question about that. You all finished the bike master plan a while back, a couple of years ago. You're doing this pedestrian master plan. There's the complete streets design guidelines. How will all that sort of come together? I know that in the bike master plan, you have tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 projects. This presumably will have the same thing, but I would imagine that on some of these streets, like you might not have room to do both of those things, and like how will those things be kind of prioritized and combined into something that also fits in complete streets?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the Complete Streets Guide is sort of it's kind of revolutionary for Montgomery County. It's kind of revolutionary for suburban jurisdictions, and it's going to have a lot of next steps. So one of those next steps is going to need to be revisions to our transportation master plan, and a plan that tries to bring all these recommendations together for the first time. We do have a bike plan. We'll have a pedestrian plan. We have a highway plan and a transit plan, but they're all separate. So we'll have an effort that brings them all together.
It's kind of like an overlay?
An overarching plan.
Okay.
And I think one really cool thing about the Complete Streets Design Guide is that it will eventually create standards for different types of roads in such a way that it's kind of more of a policy document than a master plan itself.
Sure.
So I think the question about how to integrate...
Kind of like how the state highway has their context-driven... Like, is
And
it
even
similar to
much
that
more
sort of thing?
detailed.
It's much more detailed than that.
So for example, just as an example, on a downtown boulevard such as Georgia Avenue, lane width should be 10 to 11 feet wide. Speeds should be no greater than 25 miles per hour. There should be a certain type of bikeway that goes with that. Sidewalk should be a minimum. I can't remember exactly what it is, but at least 8 feet, probably wider,
12 feet,
with a wide buffer from traffic. I mean, it's aspirational, so when we approve this guidance, it's not going to make any changes. It just sets in place the guidance for when we rebuild roads, when we construct new roads.
When there's a private development project, or when there's a master plan, that sort of thing.
And it would take some of the same types of concepts like when you did the Viersville master plan and thinking about, okay, this is the type of road it is and this is what we should be
Exactly.
I think for our purposes, some of the really cool things that it's going to do is it's going to insist on certain standard widths for sidewalks and things that are probably much wider than in a lot of places than what exists today. And then one of the big things that I'm excited about is It's going to have standards for how often there need to be safe crossing locations along roads like George Avenue or Beers Mill or things like that, to really make the case that no, it's not acceptable for you to have to walk a quarter mile out of your way to cross at a crosswalk. We can have more frequent crossings than that. So it's sort of a really good example, actually, of like the interagency coordination that we have with the Department of Transportation and others on when it comes to our streets, and it's sort of going to continue as part of this project.
I don't want to get you too off your presentation here, but so you use Georgia Avenue as an example. That's a state highway, and they have their own context-driven plan. So how does that interplay, the complete streets plan for the county with state highway?
That's also an excellent question. So it will become the rules that have to be followed for every county road. For a state highway, it is the policy that Montgomery County DOT and Planning Department staff and Department of Permitting Services need to push the State Highway Administration into achieving. Their context-driven guide is actually very similar in the terminology that it's using. It's not 100% equal, but it is very similar. So it's going to be how we articulate what we want to go into that guide as it's fleshed out over the coming years.
And that's something, that guide, the state highway guide that has been alluded to, is something that we could also send out to this group. And then, so me talking at you is done. I thought I think what would be wonderful to take away from this meeting, this first meeting, is just feedback from you all on the goals and objectives that were sent out, that were shared. Just so we're all using the same language. A goal for us is a broad aspirational statement about impact over the long term. And then objectives are more specific, measurable statements that identify how a goal can be achieved. So on the next few slides, the header is going to be the goal that's in your packets, and then the individual bullets will be the objective. I guess before we get into that, do you have any questions about what I've presented so far, about what the plan is, why the plan is, how the plan is, I guess? No? All right. Great.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
about this next segment of the meeting?
Yes.
You're looking for feedback on these goals and objectives?
No, so the idea, we're looking for, if you have questions or comments about these, if you have additional goals or objectives that you think should be included, I think we're definitely open to that. We're taking notes on all of this, and I think it's our goal after this meeting to sort of synthesize what we've all talked about here in terms of the goals and objectives, and then to make changes to what we've developed and send it back out to the group to take a look at.
So I think the idea is to introduce it tonight. If you need more time to go through things, you can certainly send us comments over the next week or
over the next few weeks, definitely.
So,
Who would we direct comments to? To you, Eli?
To me,
You'll
yes.
share it with others?
Yes,
Okay.
so this is the sort of the core team plus one other person, Juan, who couldn't make it tonight. We are sort of the internal team, and then we also meet at the planning department regularly with other transportation planners. So our division is in charge of countywide planning, but there are different areas of the county that have their own transportation planning staff. So one area is within the Beltway, the second area is sort of out to White Oak and then up the 270 corridor, and then the third area is sort of the more rural agricultural reserve areas, and all of those different areas have transportation planners as well that we coordinate with on this plan, and we incorporate sort of for an internal feedback, just like we're coordinating with you all. So,
Eli,
yes.
when we talk about the goals, and we were talking earlier about the different departments, and that you're setting up the plan, but you're not responsible for how it's built. so to speak, or how it's deployed. But I think that should be one of our master plan goals, or is that we should build something. And I'll throw this as an example. The book paper. The idea is that each community or the county, whoever, they're responsible for repairing them, fixing them, making sure, all that. But yet, when things happen, then nobody, where do you go? Because everybody's sort of passing the buck.
Right.
Well, that's up to the owner, that's up to this person, well, that's up to that county, no, that's up to this. So I think one of our master plan goals should incorporate that if we're gonna do this, that we wanna make sure that, MDOT, SHA, and all those other people, are on board with it, or are at least saying, well, that's something that we couldn't do.
Yeah, no, I
It's
think that
our
makes sense.
responsibility, but, you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. Yeah, I think we all want this to be implemented, and then we want it to be maintained, right? So,
We wanna make sure that the people that are gonna maintain it
yeah.
feel that they can maintain it, and that they feel that it is their responsibility.
Yeah, I think we agree with that definitely. I think part of sort of the conversation about sort of the interagency coordination is about building a sense of ownership within those agencies for this plan. So I think we're hoping that one of the outcomes of that is sort of that they're willing to maintain sort of a higher standard or a certain type of facility that is in line with what the plan wants to do. Karen.
Yeah, I think one thing in this discussion, looking back at these again, I realize now what was occurring to me is your objective. I think the first set of these ones in here, the ones about creating a comfortable network.
Yes.
Go back to your slide before that. I think though these objectives here, I think do meet your question, how do you get to that goal? But I think some of your other ones, like for instance, increasing walking states, they're not identifying how you meet it. They're just a more detailed set of saying, have we met it? Whether we've met it. Because it's something that says, my objective is determine the amount of trips to be accomplished by walking, or even just to say increase. I mean, these are all ways of saying, have we gotten to the point of getting people to do more walking? But none of these identify why people aren't walking. I mean, I live 5 minutes, not 5 minutes, but a block and a half from the mall, from my house, to the stairways up into there. I walk to the metro station, that's no problem. But I don't walk to the grocery store. Why? Because when I come home from the grocery store, I'm toting a bunch of groceries. I've suggested to the mall many times that maybe they might want to work on a program of having little wheeled carts like people have in New York and really urban areas, so that when I have my groceries, I can get them home. But I drive because I've got 3 or 4 heavy bags of groceries. So I mean, I think there's some thought. I think you need to think a little more on these objectives as to what are some things we can do to make walking more useful to people, and why are people not walking to certain places?
Sure.
Debbie Brown. One of the things that I think is missing is that one of the things that actually makes you walk more is when there are actually more pedestrians, so that kind of builds on itself, so that if a few people are out there, that others then will follow, just because it starts to feel more safe when there's more people. And then another thing that is negative is perceived that you're a place where muggings will happen or whatever, that it's perceived to be unsafe. And I don't know how you get past when everybody starts worrying about, I don't go out because of crime, and well, has there been a crime in this area? Well, I don't know, but there's a crime somewhere, and I just heard about it on the news that you don't ever get past when does the perceived crime rate get low enough that people will start walking around, and especially certain kinds of people, women, and especially minority women, that they worry about things more than I do. I'll go all kinds of places, and some people whose background is a little bit different, they're just, everybody has scared them about everything, and So that's another factor. I don't know how you kind of quantify that and.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that, yeah, the two things you hit on, sort of the virtuous cycle of walking begets walking, and then public safety, I think, is definitely something that, not just, I mean, I've talked a lot about traffic safety, but sort of personal safety is something that we should also look at. Kristen?
One thing that I would like to see a little bit better integrated into some of the goals and objectives is a prioritization of some of the absolutely necessary walking routes that people need to go to school, to go to work, and to get to transit. I think that building that in and prioritizing it will also help with some of the equity issues. If someone doesn't have a car because they can't afford a car, they need to be able to walk safely, and they need to be able to get to the metro safely, and these sorts of things. So I would just like to see a little bit of prioritization on that versus, completing a route that's solely for recreation, even though that's still important.
Sure.
Following up a little bit on what Karen was saying, so what you guys have here identifies a lot of objectives and metrics, but is this master plan supposed to also identify the methods?
Yeah, so that's a good point, actually, that probably should have been in here a little bit more. This plan, when it's complete, will do a few things. One, it'll prioritize infrastructure. So it'll make recommendations where new or improved sidewalks and crossings should go. Another thing it will do is make recommendations about policy that should be changed. So things like, for instance, what's in the news now, like construction detour, pedestrian access, that sort of thing. Another thing this plan will do is make design recommendations. So that's not just the design of sidewalks, so like what materials should sidewalks be, but it's where should lighting for crosswalks be, how intense should that light be, the standards that sort of underlie our pedestrian experience. So, and then the last part is it's going to make programming recommendations. So are there programs that the county should have to encourage more walking that it doesn't have? So that's sort of, at the end of the day, those are the things that we want to use to accomplish these things. Those things and more sort of through this
So who
process.
provides the subject matter expertise to make these recommendations?
So we have a certain amount of expertise. We also, we're in the process of procuring outside consulting support to identify some of these best practices in the different areas we're interested in. So we already have a pretty big list of topic areas that we think if we could improve them, we would have a much improved pedestrian environment. But we want to talk to you all about maybe other areas or issues of concern that you have when it comes to pedestrian activity or pedestrian safety that we can then bring to the consulting team and say, we're also interested in these things. What are other communities doing when it comes to this? What are the national standards? What are sort of the international best practices when it comes to these things? So it's our hope to sort of take all of the concerns that we have, use our expertise, the expertise of sort of other consultant support, and then bring forward recommendations that sort of move us in the direction that we want to go. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is this plan will be a tool for the future, right? It'll set the standards, the programs, what we should do going forward. But if in your plan we decide that crosswalks should have 100 lumens to be safe, that's great going forward, right?
Yes.
But what if how do we find out if 50% of our crosswalks only have 50 lumens and that's why people are getting run over? Is there a part of this that implements sort of a look back and does an inventory of our existing sidewalks with a measuring device, and we determine, oh yeah, we've got 50% of our sidewalks that are underlit, and let's do something about it? Or is that not part of this journey?
Lighting's actually a really interesting example because it's very difficult to measure. One thing that I didn't mention when I talked about the level of comfort analysis is that at the same time that we've been doing that, the Department of Transportation hired a consulting firm to look at all of the sidewalks in Montgomery County in terms of sort of how many like tree roots have destroyed the sidewalk and the quality of the sidewalk and the presence of those bumpy domes at the street intersections and pedestrian signals and things like that. So they've done sort of an accessibility scan that we're hoping to incorporate into our analysis as well. The lighting thing is interesting, just sort of frankly. It was one of the things that we wanted to include as a variable in the level of comfort analysis that we were doing. And at the beginning of that process, we had data. There is data about lighting. We just weren't, at the end of the day, weren't very confident in the quality of it. So we didn't include lighting in that analysis. So I think we would love to have an understanding of where there is high quality pedestrian lighting and sort of substandard pedestrian lighting. I think the problem is that just based on our review, I'm not confident there is actually any quality pedestrian lighting of crosswalks or along sidewalks in most of Montgomery County. So I think our interest is in, as those lights are replaced, as new lighting is added, it's done to a standard that over time can improve the quality of lighting. And then when we are reviewing private development, or the Department of Permitting Services is reviewing private development, as these private developments rebuild our streetscape, that the lighting along their frontages is done in a way that is in line with the standards that we've identified. So it's sort of, it's aspirational. Some of the things I think we will be looking back at, like the sidewalk quality and how the sort of the dimensions of the sidewalk and the streetscape space. Lighting is just something that's much more difficult to measure, and we haven't been able to do that or to get data that we were comfortable with about existing conditions.
But hold on, that's not to say that we can't do that in the future. That could be one of the recommendations of this plan. We've made the determination that it is so time-consuming and expensive to collect this data that we can't do that as part of this plan. But the recommendation could be that that is a critical thing we need to look at.
Yes.
Oh.
Thank you, Dave.
You kind of clear a little bit of what you just set up for me, but like what Chris just said, you know, I'm a bus operator. I drive the bus. I live up county and I do most of my roads up county. I'm one of the first buses, first thing in the morning, and throughout most of the streets, it's pitch black.
Right.
So most of the time, I can't even see the passengers on the side of the street by the bus stops, because you know it's 4 something in the morning. They have low lighting or no lighting at all. So, and then some of them by the bus stop, they have those big branches hanging over where whatever light is there, it's already done shaded, so you can't see anything. So, if we're going to be able to give more recommendation on where we should have lighting also, okay, that's good, because
Yeah.
like I said, being a bus operator, I see it almost every day, all day.
You have a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're here.
I mean, maybe one recommendation is a technology recommendation that all of our bus drivers who are the front line seeing all this stuff can report traffic signals out, lights out, and you have an app on your phone and somebody deals with it. I mean, that would make a lot of sense. Maybe that could be a recommendation we come up with.
We have like where we actually send some of the data into, like, they have a part within the department you send if you see a sign down, you see branches down, but it never reached the point where they said, like, if you think it need more lighting by a bus stop or anything like that. Now that would be something good that we could
Okay,
actually
yeah,
do.
that's a great idea. Harriet.
Yes, I was just wondering, would this plan possibly provide some kind of room for MCPS to collaborate with you? Because some of the bus stops where the students have to run to, you find it like you have intersections and cars are coming, some might stop, some might not stop, and you're wondering if there's a way that you can build that into this plan to identify bus stops for these kids?
Yeah, I think a couple people in this room have been coordinating over the past several months with MCPS to create not just a bus stop safety issue sort of in response to the students that were hit on Georgia Avenue in Aspen Hill, but just sort of lighting a fire under the MCPS administration to sort of view walking and being a pedestrian on the way to school as an important thing that they should be encouraging. So yeah, I think we have a good relationship with MCPS, and we will be coordinating with them to sort of improve those conditions. And I think my goal would be, there's a huge budget that MCPS spends every year on busing students, and some of those students are bused very short distances because they've decided it's too dangerous for them to cross certain streets. In Aspen Hill, again, for instance, Harmony Hills Elementary is surrounded by, it has a catchment area that extends beyond Georgia Avenue, but the MCPS has decided that Georgia Avenue is too unsafe for elementary students to cross, rightfully so. So students get bused about a quarter mile across Georgia Avenue to their school, and what I'm thinking would be sort of a better, more efficient use of the tremendous budget that we have for transportation would be to make some improvements to Georgia Avenue itself, which maybe costs more upfront than running this bus year after year, but over time, if we can make it safer for students to walk to school, we get all of the health benefits of that, all of the sort of independence benefits of that, and we're not running the buses, so we have the environmental benefits, and they save money in the long run. So that situation plays out in hundreds or thousands of places across the county. So if we can sort of expand that out, the sort of mindset of transportation to include improving the environment around it, I think we'll be better off. So
Can I just add to that? Because I'm one of those people that's been advocating for safer bus routes.
Didn't want to put anyone on the spot.
Sorry. That was one reason I was trying to also make the point of kind of prioritizing certain types of connections, like routes to school. Because if we can kind of build into this plan certain distances around a school, for example, where you would want to make sure there's really safe infrastructure, that helps to set that expectation, not just with MCPS, but also with MCDOT and State Highway Administration. And, you know, if we can have a place, as an advocate, we can have a place to point to in a master plan that says, this is a high priority and this is kind of the way it should be done to ideally get people walking. I think that would be a really good thing for us to do.
And with kind of taking that to the next step, going through some of these objectives, there's a lot of counting exercises that lend themselves to, it's easiest for us to add 27 trees along this one pathway, but where is it most impactful to add those 27 trees? Where does it make the biggest difference to the most amount of pedestrians within the county, so that we can focus more on helping more people and less on just putting in a certain number of trees? Yeah,
I hear you. I think some of these objectives and metrics are sort of outcome driven, and some of them are sort of input driven, and those sort of like the ones you mentioned are not as satisfying because you can sort of just add trees wherever, for instance, in this example, and get credit for it. So I think we are thinking about that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think another thing that we're thinking about is we have to be able to measure all these things and quantify them. I guess when either in this forum today or in the future, if you're emailing me tomorrow or next week about different goals or objectives you may have, think about how you would measure that, because we're gonna have to do that.
I guess my only other thought was sort of, a lot of this is very big and infrastructure say, and sometimes the things, and it goes back to my how do you get there as opposed to how do you measure it, is like, if the problem is you can't see people, one way of doing it is put a whole lot more lighting in. The other is to have everybody have reflective jackets. Which is a lot cheaper and simpler, and something could be done like right away. I don't know if you can pass a law requiring everybody buy one, but could there be programs where you hand out lots and lots of reflective armbands and an education campaign saying, wear this armband in the wintertime so you don't get run down?
So how would you enforce that? I've been carrying an armband in my bag for 5 years and I've never once won.
Well, I can't say everybody will, but, you know, I mean, I'm just saying, it's sort of, it's one of those things that doesn't hurt to do those kind of things, and, you know, that has an effect too.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's no one answer. I think
Right, I'm just
that,
saying.
yeah, I think, and I would say that our DOT colleagues are doing those programs today.
See?
Christy has one. We were at an event on Monday where a DOT colleague brought some of those. So I think, yeah, there's not one answer, but if I'm being honest, some of the education or reflective pedestrian ideas, I think we've seen the efficacy of them, and it's in isolation, it's not enough. I think it's important, but it's not enough.
Can I just add one point to that? In that, part of the reason I think people are advocating for more infrastructure is because it creates a scenario where people are less able to make mistakes and stuff. And so, like, I think like saying, oh, everyone should wear an armband is another point of human failure.
Right, which is against sort of the spirit of Vision Zero, which is that.
So, I mean, it can help, and it's great to be able to be seen, and you know, like, there are ways that people can be seen through lighting or through a reflector or through whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's if we can kind of just change the whole system into a different direction, this can just be this little flasher can be an extra thing.
Supplemental.
Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for.
Debbie.
So, although I view the whole pedestrian master plan as one kind of equity, you know, the particular goal for building an equitable and just pedestrian network, I'm wondering where that interface with the new Racial Equity and Social Justice Act is going to be, or if this is representative, this goal is representative of the kind of collaboration with that staff that's now.
This is sort of our first effort to do that. Did you?
Yeah. So this plan is going to be required by law to have a equity component, as all master plans will. The law doesn't actually give a lot of detail about what we have to do. And so we all need to figure that out, because this is something that's very new.
But this is also something, this goal would have been in this plan even if that didn't exist. So if we have leeway to address equity to the best that we can, I think the help of all of you to sort of hone this goal, to add objectives, to add clarity to what we're trying to do. I think, I think that's my point. Any other, Mary Beth?
So this is just a thought, but bus stops, you know, when you're walking around, it's great when you know where there's a bus stop. And it would be nice if we could find a way to make bus stops easier to understand. You know, I'm walking around, I like see a bus stop, but where does it go? What does it do? I'm not really sure. You know, when you're a tourist in an area, it's nice when you know you can walk somewhere and then you get on the bus and it's going to take you somewhere. Those bus stops, sometimes are just a pole in the ground, and if you're visually impaired, you don't even know there's a pole in the ground. You don't know that it's even there. They might just have a number on there. You don't know where it goes, or
you can't even find it.
You can't even find it, right?
It's like wayfinding. Better wayfinding.
So I guess what I could talk about that was some of the bus stops, they actually put in the monitors inside of those big bus stops now, where it actually tells you which bus comes and they show you a whole map of the county, which direction it goes. But not every bus stop can have the preview of having it, because you know some of them are just only a sign by itself and not a whole standing station, which that would be something good to have to maybe recommend, that you start with more of the whole big bus stop where they can actually have the screens.
I think there's also
tactfully identifying all the bus stops.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's an opportunity to make the bus stops that we have, whether they're the shelters with the signage and the screens, or just the normal poles accessible to people. So whether that's, I think we can just figure that out as part of this group and with the work that we're doing with consultants. And we can bring that to Ride On. We can talk to Amada about that and figure out how to do that, how to make that happen. Yeah, I think that's really important. Access to transit for people walking, for people rolling with different.
But easy to understand.
Yeah.
I know I'm walking along and I'm so tired. I'm just gonna ride the bus. But
I think it's
where do
broader
you
than
go?
buses too. It's like,
Yeah.
you know,
It's any
general.
Yeah, I've noticed that the state, I believe, has put these brown signs everywhere.
Yeah.
There are brown signs everywhere.
And
Yeah.
some of them don't make, I question what their purpose is. There's a brown sign near me telling them to access Sligo Creek Parkway from there, as opposed to just anywhere else.
Just
That's
anywhere
like a
else on
mile
Sligo Creek
stretch.
Parkway.
Like, and so, but they're also very designed for drivers, and
Mhm.
like we don't have good wayfinding for bicyclists and pedestrians.
There was a good article actually in Curbed this week that talked about, I mean, if we're around, you see or you've experienced those like traffic signal, like the utility boxes next to traffic signals.
Yeah.
I'm gonna confess, I didn't actually read the article, but I saw the picture from the article, and there was, people put maps all on these so you could see where you were going, and just using infrastructure that already exists in a new way. So rather than putting a sign up, just pasting a sign to a structure that already exists. So things like that, that got sent around our office a couple times actually. That's the sort of thing that we can look at as part of this
Actually, like the
plan.
bus itself, I've seen, you know, for those special routes, like Circulator or whatever, you can, there's like a little map on the side of the bus, like, oh, I know this bus is going.
Yeah.
It's right on the side
Also
of the
true.
bus.
Where to get on and know where it goes. You know?
But there's also like a safety aspect to these bus stops, and which really should be a priority area, because there's a lot of bus stops that aren't out of the splash zone, where there's nowhere safe to stand. That's outside of that splash zone or that side mirror zone.
Yeah, that's true.
And
And you don't want to stand back in the back of the shelter, because some drivers, of course, the lights could be out, and I don't know, and like the driver here that can't see us because the lights are out, we don't know.
Yeah.
That if you stand too far back, they think you're not waiting for the bus, and you don't hear, we can't hear a bus in some places till it's almost on top of us, depending on the sound of the traffic. And you're not jumping right out in front of that bus, the driver will just go right by you because they don't know you want the bus. So, so part of that is, no matter what kind of free shelter they give me, I will stand out almost at the curb, so there's no way they're gonna think I'm not getting on that bus.
yes, Deborah, that's happened to me too.
Annie.
It's kind of a technical question or observation, but in some of the objectives and metrics, there's mention of accessible paths and accessible routes, and I guess maybe this is a question, I guess. Would we be defining how we, Montgomery County, are defining accessibility? Like, are we looking at things like beyond technical ADA compliance, ADA being the Americans with Disabilities Act, but would that be the aspiration to go, if we decided to go beyond the technical compliance standards, or do we have to fall within? I mean, yes, that is.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something.
Well, I mean, for sidewalks, they're really horrible. Like, there aren't even ADA real regulations.
So there are, the U.S. Access Board has some standards and some things that they've developed, but I'll let you answer.
Yeah, so we're thinking about this in terms of the data that we have available, the data that MCDOT has collected. So we know some information like sidewalk widths, we know things like that. So that has an accessibility component, but the DOT data also has information on what they're calling, I believe, vertical discontinuities, which we would call just broken sidewalks, like heaved sidewalks due to tree roots or something like that. And
Or a hasty repair, as is in my neighborhood, a hasty repair by, I don't know who did it, I don't know if WSOC, they had to dig something up, because I never did figure out who dug it up, but when they put it back together, that's one of those icky repairs that Cindy was talking about earlier, that they you know, when somebody hastily repairs something like that, they don't do their job.
And that's something, sort of utility repairs are another thing we can tackle as part of this plan, but looking at the MCDOT data with our data, we should be able to create a picture that's not perfect of accessibility from a countywide perspective, but the idea on some of these objectives is that if a pathway is considered comfortable in our level of comfort analysis, it should also be accessible. So it should score comfortably for people who are able-bodied, and it should be accessible for everybody. So that's sort of an aspirational goal, because we know that there are plenty of sidewalks that are wide and have a nice buffer and are next to slow-moving traffic that maybe the sidewalk's falling apart. So it's comfortable enough in certain ways, but it wouldn't be accessible. So we want to limit the number of situations where those two things diverge. And I think coming up with an accessibility definition is well within the purview of this group and within this plan. And if anyone has any suggestions or ideas, we can sort of talk about that over the course of the plan.
One thing that I would like us to at least put a placeholder in this plan for is somebody had mentioned technology earlier, but infrastructure technology would be good to think about, like with the kind of the types of like vehicle to pedestrian to infrastructure kind of communications that are being developed right now. Like it just would be good to think about how we might want to contextualize that in some of these different types of environments.
So that would be like sensors that can see pedestrians or something like that.
And even it gets into stuff like the bus wayfinding. Just as one example, I know there's been an accessibility issue with the floating bus stops, and there's been a suggestion that maybe you could put sensors in the bus stops and things like that, but that's one example. Another example might be some of the apps and other things that are coming into the marketplace that you can carry as a pedestrian that makes it so cars can see you or know that you're there or whatever. I mean,
Sure.
there's just
That's
a lot of
point.
stuff that are kind of cutting edge technologies right now, but this, I presume, will be a long-term plan. So just kind of putting a placeholder in there would be nice.
I don't want to depend on a lot of that stuff. First of all, you don't want to require people to buy $1,000 phones to be, that's not accessibility.
Sure, I guess I wouldn't say put it in there in a way where people need to depend on it, but acknowledge that this is where technology is kind of going.
Yeah, I think I also, like Debbie, sort of am hesitant to, obviously, I think you didn't say this, and I don't think you mean this, to like require something like that, but the plan should be aware that that is happening and should weigh in some way how Montgomery County should respond to something like that.
I mean,
think
that's
that
a huge equity issue.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I was just thinking two things. One, which is kind of tying into this, is the envisioning what you could put on the sign poles that would give you that, whether it's something goes to an app or something that just talks to you or whatever. That thought. The other thought, which is a really different point, is does this plan look at all in terms of inside of the shopping malls, the private property, and so forth, in terms of getting around those? Because that's the other point.
Parking lots.
Yeah, the other reason why I don't walk over and do my grocery shopping there is with that utility thing. There is no way that there's no sidewalk around Wheaton Mall, the vast majority of it, even though they promised us one as part of warehouse, not the gas station, but the warehouse, but we've never gotten that. And you step out, you have to step right out in the middle of a road at which people are zooming along. You go through there, they allow them to build a warehouse with literally no more than the width of my foot between the wall of the warehouse and the road. So a 14-inch piece of concrete there. So, you have to walk through this busy road in order to get over to, these areas where you're trying to go to. So I think it's something that you have to really think about. If you're trying to get people to make trips, their shopping trips, as one of your pieces there, I think you're going to have to start looking at the way that shopping centers are designed.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think that a large number of crashes involving pedestrians happen in parking lots, and parking lot design is something that, as the plan, we actually do have control over in the planning department and with in the Department of Permitting Services. So I think you're right. I think this plan, sort of unlike the bike plan or unlike some of our other functional countywide plans, people are pedestrians in public space, and they're also pedestrians in private space, both outside of buildings and inside of buildings. So if we have recommendations as part of this group that are about how buildings are built or sort of the internal layout of buildings, I think that's also worth exploring. It's sort of, we're in a unique position as pedestrians in that we don't lock our bike and go in a building or park our car or whatever. We just walk in. So it's sort of the continuation of the same experience. I think with that, please send me ideas about the goals and objectives over the next few weeks. If there are any other issues or topics you think we should be discussing, or ideas, sort of like pet peeves that you have about the pedestrian environment, also feel free to share those. And then I would just open it up. Folks in the back who are kind enough to join us this evening, if any of you have any thoughts. Allison, please.
So it was a great discussion tonight, and I'm one of the other people who's been working with MCPS through the McHenry County Council of PTAs. We've been really putting a lot of pressure on MCPS to increase its traffic safety, particularly pedestrian safety, and we're keenly aware of the students who have recently been hit and killed, unfortunately. So part of that has me thinking that one thing that would be great is to not silo off the way we so often do, where we look at planning and we look at parks and we look at schools, and integrating schools into the equation more. And I think that's going to take some creative stuff. I think it's great that you're soliciting data, and I've been so happy to help you all, and I will continue to push for that. And we've heard a lot of positive. That's really gotten a lot of parents excited. Parents are really glad that that's being done. I've heard from a lot of parents who are happy about it. What isn't happening is we need to maybe communicate about this plan to the leadership of MCPS, specifically to school principals. And I would really love to work with you, Eli, on identifying some points in the year when all the principals are gathered together for trainings. Now is the time to get on that calendar, so you and I should maybe prioritize that. There's a point when they all come together and they have to learn the new rules for the coming year.
Yeah.
And if we have all the principals from the whole county in one room and we can say, hey, we're doing this pedestrian plan, I guarantee you probably 80% of them are completely oblivious to this plan. Not because they're oblivious people and they don't care about it, but because they just have a lot.
Yeah, they're
they have to
busy
do.
people.
Principals are really, so that's one thing. I think talking directly to school administrators, not just to the people in Carver, which is the building over there near Montgomery College, but talking to the actual administrators at schools as much as possible as you go through this over the next couple of years is going to be really, really key. A lot of them really do literally stay up at night worrying about kids being hit. So that's one thing. The other thing is incorporating the trail system, not siloing off our extremely excellent trail system. I love to be a pedestrian. I walk everywhere. One thing that strikes me in Maryland that's very different from Virginia is that in Virginia, they see their park trails as part of their commuter system. They light some of their trails, and they acknowledge that it would be good if bikers could use park trails as a way to commute to work. Here, for some reason, we have always thought there's play and there's work. You go out, you do heart-healthy walking, and then you go and you drive to work. And more and more, I think, as people are looking for accessibility, sadly, I know of an example in my neighborhood where a child was traveling to Sligo Middle School about 4 or 5 years ago from downtown Silver Spring, and they were riding on the Sligo Creek Trail and they were struck on Forest Glen. And they were commuting to school and not connecting those dots, literally, of it's perfectly logical that they should be able to ride their bike using the Sligo Creek Trail. I think any way we can make sure that trails are good for recreation. I'm a big hiker.
but thinking that trails can also be commuter routes, can be viable arteries to go and get your groceries, can be viable arteries to go into church. That is a huge quality of life issue. So, and I think WMATA is part of that as well.
Definitely, yeah. I think Parks is our sister agency,
Right.
sort of in the commission, and in our internal group where we also have the local area transportation planners. We also have the new senior trails planner, Darren Fluchet,
Yeah.
who you may know, and other park staff. So Parks is really excited to be part of this. I think they are bought in to what you're describing. So I think we're going to make it happen.
I think that's a mindset, though.
Yeah, sure.
And that's the thing is, I actually think that the parks people are already thinking that way. I'm not so sure. Like, it would be nice to convince more people to understand trails are not just
Sure.
for.
Sure, yes.
I was wondering whether there are plans to involve the county's ADA compliance office at some point in this, because they are deep into accessibility, obviously, and countywide. They also have good contacts around the country and indeed the world from their other people doing compliance. They'd be good for best practice.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we'll reach out to them very shortly. We've also met, I've presented this similar presentation to the Commission on People with Disabilities, and we're very closely connected to that group. But yeah, it's a really great point. Thank you. Sorry, yeah, in the back.
I was making a good point about in the schools, but on the iron tonight, so sidewalks around our neighborhood school, and it comes up every year. And immediately the listener lights up with trees, trees, trees. We won't have any trees if we have sidewalks. Maybe with the partners that we're working with, we try to get arborists or whatever, and just kind of and that mindset that we can't have trees and sidewalks.
That is actually a gigantic issue. It is bigger than people want to acknowledge. I get a lot of emails every week about that.
Yeah, a couple things. I'm John Whitmore. In terms of trees and sidewalks, sometimes just adjusting their sidewalk design a little bit will let them avoid trees. And you can adjust the design, change materials, curve the path, whatever you need to do to avoid the tree.
Sure.
Or if the street's wide enough, even bump out
Move it out into the street, yeah.
And you go over to Kensington, you see an example of that where they did that, and an example on the Fairfax Road in the right, just narrow the street. I produced a TV series called Trails for Pedestrians. The website pedestrians.org, and a blog. There's a lot of information on there. A recent episode, I did an interview about the Portland pedestrian plan. A couple years ago, I did the Indianapolis pedestrian plan. Go back a ways, you can find North Vancouver, Nashville, quite a few. And you might find some of that information
Thank you.
Informative or useful. My blog, I have an example there of signal control boxes with artwork, and an example from Victoria, British Columbia, where they have maps on them.
Great.
So, there's a lot of information.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, back to trees. I'm from a historic neighborhood, and my house is over 100 years old, and we have frontage which is filled with very old growth trees. And we have been told by the State Highway Administration that they put sidewalks in, the trees are gone. So, first of all, that is not an ADA requirement size sidewalk in the city.
Sure, yeah.
It's because they take 5 feet, but in actuality they take 15 feet of people's front yards. And in our case, over 20 old growth trees would come out of just our yard, 1 yard. And that will also affect the trees further back because arborists have now done research that if you kill one tree, the others of its species may also die. An example of that is also in Capitol View Park where they put in ADA trees. 1/3 of the forest is gone. And every time I go by, more and more trees have fallen over and collapsed. So I would hope that the advisory committee will respect historic neighborhoods, especially designated historic, and those neighborhoods that are well established, where people have large trees and beautiful flowers and everything else up along the roads in the neighborhood. And with all of this, just to compare Capitol View, as I mentioned, they want to put in they want to take out 15 feet of our front yard. Brookfield Road in Chevy Chase, Maryland, is also part of the state highway, and they were allowed to put in 2.5-foot permeable sidewalks where only one tree was killed along 1 or 2 miles. And so it's good enough for Chevy Chase. It should be good enough for every historic district in the county, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Lee Kaiser, South Bradley Hills Neighborhood Association. For your evaluation, I'm curious to know to what extent existing capital improvement projects will be considered if they are, of course, sidewalk or bikeway projects. For example, if you look, well, one thing, next week, the County Council Transportation Committee will be reviewing, doing their first pass of all sidewalk and bikeway projects in the queue. I'm a little concerned because there's not even uniform reference in the project, in the CIP project justification text to the bicycle master plan, if that is a relevant fact for particular sidewalk and bikeway projects. It's very uneven whether there's any reference to the 2018 bicycle master plan, regardless if there's no reference at all to the tier level. So, of course, the work now just starting with the pedestrian master plan and with the timing of the county council being completed by May for the upcoming budget cycle, you would be influencing, of course, down the line. But I would hope that there is careful tracking of the progress or lack thereof on existing sidewalk capital projects. In our case, it's been on the master plan for 30 years.
Yes, it has.
And
yeah, no, I don't think this plan does not represent like a clean slate approach. I think the sidewalks and bikeways that have been master planned and have been programmed and designed, we don't anticipate changing that as part of this plan. So does that answer your question? It's unclear at this point how they will be, how a project being in the capital improvement program will affect the priority in terms of this plan. But that's something sort of down the line. We'll be having more public meetings about how the plan should be prioritizing. So that's something that the public will be able to weigh in on.
But in the future budget cycles, the planning department also gives some budget recommendations based on what is in your existing master plans. So once this is done, then you would be, to some extent, tracking what's happening against the plan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I could look towards when this plan is complete in 2 years, maybe you all don't know what you signed up for. I think we're going to find that rather than, unlike the bicycle master plan where we identified a network of bikeways, our goal with this plan really is to create sort of like a universal amount of comfort for people. You should be able to walk anywhere comfortably in Montgomery County. So it's not going to be about projects specifically. It's going to be about prioritizing certain maybe crossings and intersections or certain stretches of sidewalk that maybe serve a particular school or are near a high crash location for pedestrians or certain things like that. And it's not going to be as prescriptive about, like in the bike plan, it would say this should be a two-way separated bike lane versus some sort of side path. It's just going to say probably this needs to be at a certain comfort level. We're not going to sort of prescribe what the engineering treatment should be. It should just be better.
Sanders, just wondered what frequency is expected of these type of meetings. If we are signed up on the list, will we be receiving notices of them, and the things that were being sent out, will they be put on the website?
Yes. So the meetings, our current timeline is a little bit up in the air because some of the pedestrian level of comfort information that we're collecting is taking a long time to sort of collect for the entire county. So these meetings will probably not happen regularly, like every month, but they will be noticed well in advance of the meeting, and the materials for this meeting are actually online now, including the presentation. But those materials for future meetings will be put online as soon as they're created as well.
The things that you mentioned you would send out.
Yes. Yeah, those will be online as well. Yes. Sorry, yeah, Helene.
Getting back to what she was just talking about, I think part of what she's saying is it might be useful to go through the CIP now to see what projects had sidewalk pedestrian issues that you want to kind of keep track of, so that when we are done, you can go back and say, this is a project that needs to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank
There's
you.
6-year plans and things get pushed, so.
Yes. Yeah.
There's probably a lot of projects that we could influence that
Yeah.
are in the plan now.
That's true. Yeah, that's a really good point. Oh, you're
Me,
sorry,
right here. Hi.
over Karen. Yeah, sorry.
Catherine Lucas McKay. I am a downtown resident and a member of the Silver Spring Cab. One of the questions that I have, and forgive me if this was mentioned in the first 30 minutes before I arrived, is around the role of public safety officials and officers and budgets in both your work developing this plan and in thinking around what pedestrian safety means in the county. Because that is something that in downtown we have struggled with, lack of presence, but then also this week we have seen that potentially when officers have discretion to enforce pedestrian safety laws, what they do is go after men of color walking in the street with no sidewalk. So I feel like that's an important part of your group's work, but I also just am wondering where it actually fits in your jurisdiction and the work that you're doing going forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. We touched on it a little bit before we got here, I guess, just in that we'll be collaborating a lot with our partners in different agencies, and the police department is definitely one of them. I think there's a lot that can be done from a traffic safety enforcement perspective in the county, and this plan is sort of just one of the levers that we have to influence that. So if you have any thoughts on what could be improved, feel free to send them my way. And I think it gets into the equity issue, it gets into the safety issue. Enforcement is sort of one of the components traditionally of a successful Vision Zero program, and I know the police department is thinking about that in certain ways when it comes to automated traffic enforcement and cameras like that, but I think there's a lot more that can be done.
Doesn't enforcement, if you're getting to enforcement, isn't that a bit of failing of design?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. So it's sort of a multi-pronged approach. But yeah, I think you're right. Traditionally, if the speed limit's 25 and people are going 45, the engineering response would be to make the street such that you can only go 25. And enforcement is sort of a patch on top of that. So I think we're thinking about that, but in the short term, before roads can be reconstructed, there's some sort of interim measures that are needed.
And now that Catherine's brought that up, there's also, back to that example, there's also the issue of education of the police and the public safety officials of the rights of pedestrians and bicyclists for that matter. Because in this case, it is perfectly legal to walk in a road where there's no sidewalk.
Right.
And I also wanted to connect this with what Allison said earlier about the trails, and having it be important that the parks and the trails are part of our pedestrian travel infrastructure, because for most of the year, either in the morning or in the evening, it's after dark, and technically speaking, you're not allowed to be in a park, including Sligo Creek or Rock Creek, after dark. And that's, I have, but I'm also aware that this is a place where you could get inequitable enforcement of rules if you don't change these laws and educate the people.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. We're running out of time. I am happy to talk to people after the meeting. Just quickly, next steps for us. So for the project team here on the park and planning side, we're going to continue building out that pedestrian level of comfort map. That's at mcatlas.org/pedplan if you want to check on our progress. We're going to be finalizing, hopefully, our 2 RFPs, requests for proposal for the consultant assistance for that survey and the best practices analysis will be going out soon. We're going to continue our interagency coordination. And then one thing I'd like to do, if you all are amenable, is I'd like to schedule sort of like one-on-one or group walks with advisory group members in your neighborhood or wherever you want to walk, and we can just sort of talk one-on-one. It's a crazy idea, but so I'll be reaching out to schedule some of that over the next few weeks and months.
Eli, we're doing Y walks again.
Do you want to pitch? Yeah, pitch Y walks.
I also work at the YMCA in Silver Spring, right up Colesville here. And we're going to start monthly walks in April. The first one is April 4th. And it's Saturday, April 4th, right here outside the Civic Center building. We meet at 8:30. The walks go from 8:30 to about 10:30. There's a halfway point, so if you only want to do half the walk, you can do half the walk. If you want to do the full walk, you can. And some of them have like interesting themes. The first month is health related, and we're actually walking to the National Institutes of Health. No, that's not right. There's a health museum. Yes, that museum. It's like that museum. That direction. And we're going to do some Purple Line related stuff, some urban parks. So we're partnering with Montgomery Parks as well and some other local people. So if people are interested in that, I'll give Eli.
I can send out the information about that.
Speaking of accessibility, do you do walks to the Y?
Yes. Yes.
And then next steps for you all, talk about this plan with your neighbors, communicate what they say back to us would be super helpful. Talk to us about goals and objectives, issues you think we should discuss, and then just be pedestrians in Montgomery County. Just enjoy. Yes, I'm here.
Create a one-pager or something along those lines, something easy that we can share with folks that
Yeah,
speak on this.
we can do that. Yeah, I think we have a one-pager. I think we need to tweak it a little bit, but I can send it out as a PDF. Next time we meet, I can also bring printouts for you to distribute.
Is there a relationship between census and funding of projects such as this?
Probably not a direct relationship, but one of the sort of the pieces of the data puzzle that we'll look at is population. Yes. So I think there's a role, and demographics, obviously, when we're talking about equity. The county, right now, we use a metric of equity that was created by the local council of governments called equity emphasis areas that look at different socioeconomic factors. As part of the general plan that we're doing in the planning department, we're developing a county-specific equity measure that will identify pockets of specific need in the county, and we'll probably be using that as part of this plan moving forward. So that relies on census data.
Okay. Coming home, much so. Everyone.
The census. Be counted.
Much so. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just one additional announcement on like events coming up. As some of you may have seen in the news and in the Bethesda magazine article this week, Action Committee for Transit has been holding memorials for every pedestrian killed in Montgomery County. The next one is March 8th at 2 p.m. for Adonis Gomez in Gaithersburg. So if you'd like more information about that, let me know. I can make sure that you get it.
Sure.
Just one thought, and you may already be doing this, but if there's anything that we're going to be sending out to people, if there's pictures or anything, you can have a description of what that picture is. And, I don't know if you like PDFs. Debbie, any thoughts on PDFs?
Well, if we do it right, it's okay, and it's hard to tell somebody that they don't do it right how to fix it. So, I mean, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, that's something that we're thinking about. But thank you all. This is the first of many, and I'm very excited